Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee being held on Tuesday the 23rd of July 2024. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information of this meeting are available for public viewing on the Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the YouTube channel and is making a recording. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand feature within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they're called upon. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I'm pleased to say there are no apologies for absence, so no substitutes either. Are there any declarations of interest? I see none, thank you. Item 4 is minutes of the meeting. The minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of June 2024 are included in the agenda for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer, so are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? If I have a show of hands, please. Thank you very much. We have one abstention, I think. Chris, you weren't in the meeting? Yeah. Questions from members of the public? We have no questions from members of the public, nor any questions from councillors. So we move rapidly on to item 7, which is the Code of Conduct for Councillors. And the purpose of this item is to ensure us that high standards of conduct continue to be promoted and maintained, and to provide an overview of how the arrangements for dealing with complaints are being worked together. And I will ask Sean O'Connor, Head of Legal Services, Deputy Monitoring Officer, to comment on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Very rapid there. You caught me off guard slightly, but I'm now back in the room. Thank you very much for that. So, so the report before you today is an update report for 2023-24 on the application of the Code of Conduct for Councillors, and that's on pages 20. Starts on page 21 to page 64 of your report. The recommendations on page 21, and the first part is to note the activity that's been undertaken by our officers. The second recommendation relates to the updating of the Code of Conduct process. So I will talk in relation to both of those recommendations, but if I can just set the scene slightly, just so we're all aware where we are in relation to Code of Conduct and the decisions been made by this committee and the council. So we now have a standing standards panel. So we have a number of members and reserve members who are permanently appointed as a standards panel. All the decisions of the monitoring officer are now reported to the standards panel, so to the permanent members, the reserves, and the independent persons. So we think that panel has will have a very good oversight of what is being performed by officers as we go through the year. We've agreed that the process for investigations will be updated, so that's the recommendation 2. And then this committee is looking at the trends and the application of the Code of Conduct process every 6 months. So that is our what we've changed to be our new Code of Conduct governance framework. So members have an oversight of what's happening and how we apply the Code of Conduct process. So in relation to the first recommendation around activity, Chair, I won't repeat everything that's in the report, and maybe I can just focus on the charts that are there, just to kind of raise by exception. So if we move down to page 23 of the agenda, and chart A, so this is the number of historic complaints. And as you can see for 23-24, we have had an increase. So there was an increase of 50% of complaints over the previous year. It hasn't been its highest. You know, we've got 10 years worth of data on number of complaints, but it certainly seems to be heading towards the high point of 16-17. But I think in that context, you also got to look at the fact that these are 47 complaints about councillors and parish councillors in the borough, and we do have almost 1,300 councillors in total. So as a percentage, it's very, very small. The good thing is that the number of complaints against borough councillors is remained pretty static for the last 5 years, so that we haven't seen a likewise increase there. So moving down to chart B, which is page 24. So this is we measured the source of the complaint. So who is the person or organisation that raises the issue? Since the previous update that we gave 6 months ago in January time, we've seen this rebalance slightly. So we're now seeing more complaints raised by residents, which is what we would hope would happen. This is a process that's there for primarily for residents and businesses, etc., for the public, and so seeing that rebalance is pleasing. There are still quite a high number of complaints raised by parish and town councillors, so it's still 20% of all complaints, and it's unfortunate that the councillors have no option but to report the matter to the monitoring officer, or they feel that their external processes have been exhausted. So that is one trend to be aware of. So same page, if we go down to chart number C, which is just below that. So this is the relevant council. So these are the councils where the relevant member is located. 60% of all the complaints in the year relate to three councils there. But again, that looks quite negative, and it looks quite negative in the 3 councils, Herefordshire being one of those. But again, if we put this in context, there are 12 parish and town councils there, but we have 137 parish and town councils. So it's less than 10% again. Moving on to page 25. And this chart relates to the nature of the code. Now this is slightly a bit more confusing and not so obvious as the previous charts, because there are different codes of conduct, and also the complaints kind of overlap. So we do get complaints that include one or more elements of the code of conduct. What we can see, though, is that 70% of the complaints relates to disrespect, or disrespect is one of the features there. And 25% is a failure to disclose an interest. So those 2 items are the bread and butter issues that we receive. Because of the high nature of disrespect complaints, the monitoring officer, in consultation with independent persons, did write to all parish and town councils, to their clerks, which with a guidance note giving specific examples of breaches of the code in Herefordshire. That's in Appendix 4 to your report. But it was hoped that by bringing that to the clerk's attention, that would be tabled with the various councils and try to raise this as being an issue for them. So if we move on to chart E, which is on page 26. So these are the outcomes of the complaints. As you can see, we've had 39 complaints that have been resolved during the period. Only 2 of those amounted to a formal breach of the code after an investigation and a decision by the monitoring officer. So the remainder of those are where there's been no further action or another course of action, and that encompasses where, for example, the member has apologised already. So if the member has apologised, or the member has rectified the issue which has been complained about, then from a public perspective and from a kind of finance perspective, we don't see that there would be any public benefit in taking that any further when the outcome that we would be looking for has already been delivered. Following on from that, onto page 27, key performance indicators. I think I did explain or offer the excuse, however you want to measure it, that there are a limited number of key performance indicators that we're measuring at the moment. We're looking at what's there and trying to determine what would actually be useful. What we've seen in the initial assessment period, so that's the time for a complaint is first received until the monitoring officer has made a decision around what should be done with the complaint. That has reduced from 61 days in March 23, and we're now down to 15 days in October 23. So we've reduced that time period quite considerably through the efforts of mainly my colleagues, Marcia Zurian and Deborah Nixon, rather than myself, and of course the rapid attention of the independent persons who insist in giving their views before that the decision is issued. The next KPI is the time for the independent person to respond, and this is 3.6 days, which, as I mentioned previously, is exceptional, and more often not the independent person replies within hours, if certainly within the day. The last KPI, again, of limited value, because we've only had 2 complaints that have gone to a full investigation and a breach. They took 58, so the panel is aware how long this period takes. So from the point where the monitoring officer decides that we will investigate this until a decision is made is a further 58 days. Now that sounds long, but that involves investigations, discussions, people's diaries, leave incorporated, all these things that actually draw that out. I think you can see from the previous KPI, the officers address it as swiftly as possible, but it depends on third parties and more often than not their own diaries. The page 28 in paragraph 36, we've consulted the independent person on the report, and they've provided their comments there. I think the comments are positive in what we are doing. And if we move on to Appendix 1, so this is the last chart, which is on page 33 of your agenda pack. This shows the number of complaints we have received over the last 5 years. The negative, I guess, is that over 50% of the 158 complaints relate to four councils, which is a negative. But I guess the positive is that in 5 years, only 11 parish councils have had more than 2 complaints. So that's 11 from 137. So what I'm trying to provide is a little bit of context about what's not in the report rather than what is in the report. Chair, I think I'll pause that at that point before moving on to recommendation 2 about the code of conduct arrangements, just to see if there's any questions. I think it's probably a good time for me to open that back to you.
Thank you, Sean. Any observations or questions? Robert.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciated this report. The only tiny criticism is in presentation, when you've got a little tiny square that's against each of the different categories, to compare that with the colour in the chart is a little bit difficult to see which one is which. That's all. That was only a very small thing to mention.
I'll take that on board, Chair. That's my Excel skills, but I will take that on board.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sean. You mentioned that there's a lot of clumping of complaints in certain areas. There's a lot of parishes that haven't had issues and others that have. How does the monitoring officer or the investigator handle those issues where there's multiple complaints about the same incident from multiple people? Do you clump, if there's 14 complaints about the same action, the same event, does that get clumped together? Does it have to be handled separately? How does that get processed?
I don't think there's any hard and fast rules on that. And I think the officers, in consultation with the independent persons, have to make a judgment call, looking at the nature of the complaints, what they're complaining about, and more often than not, the relationship between the complainant and sometimes the counter-complainant. For example, in one of the complaints recently, we did have 14 complaints, and we decided that we were going to stop receiving any further complaints in relation to this one activity. So we refused further complaints because they was essentially adding to the same set of facts and not providing anything of any detail. So we received more complaints. We wrote back to the complainants to say this will be dealt with and we will notify you of the outcome. And then we chose to kind of coalesce that into one investigation. So we had one investigation, one investigator who had to interview multiple people. The downside of that, of course, is that it does elongate what could be a discrete point for one of the complainants. That actually, when we were saying, well, we're incorporating in one large investigation, which will include all the elements because they were related. So if it was anything which is discrete and clearly separate, we would have dealt with it. But the one in question all related from the one set of events and then the following response and conduct following that. So we made a judgment call that actually this is one complaint effectively by multiple people.
Okay, thank you. So is that reflected on your charts? Because shouldn't there be a chart then for the number of investigations, not just the number of complaints? Because doesn't that get skewed?
We include the investigations as one. It does. They don't quite match up because we receive 14. For example, this 14 complaints, but at the end result would only be one investigation, but then we would end up with 14 outcomes, so to speak. So it doesn't quite fit together like that. I agree, but it's the best way we've been able to reflect the volume of work that's coming in.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In your chart of in complaints per council, where we have easily identified several what we might call frequent flyers, is there anything that we could do to perhaps target them with some sort of education or information that might help them not to be the frequent flyers?
Sean, have you got a magic wand?
I think there are different views on this. One end of the spectrum is that, well, these are separate individual councils themselves. Who are we for Herefordshire to be intervening in how they conduct themselves? That's one purist view of it. Another purist view could be that, well, we're spending this amount of money on investigating these anyway. Why don't we try to spend less money in educating these particular frequent flyers? I quite like that, so I'll use that one again. These frequent flyers, in the fact that will then save money to the Herefordshire taxpayer. I am aware that the councils themselves do obtain assistance from their association, and the local one called HALC, which provides the chairs and training that type of thing, that type of assistance. But there is, like I said, there are a range of activities that could be done by us, by the councils themselves, by HALC, that could assist on that. It's all a question of what issue you're trying to identify and address. Like, for example, if we saw high levels of interest not being declared, that is obviously clearly, you know, if the high level of interest across the council by different members, you look at that and think, well, that's an education point. If you're seeing the same named member for respect and disrespect breaches, I don't think that there's much that we can do in relation to education on that side of thing. But I don't know.
Thinking particularly of the MO's letter on disrespect that we were talking about earlier this afternoon, this is the sort of thing I had in mind, whether we could further that, drive that home a little harder.
Yeah, that's completely open for this committee to make a recommendation. That we have written to all the parish councils. We could write to the top rated parish councils, and we could go back and say, well, you know, what have you done in respect to that? Have you discussed this? Is there any assistance you need on that point? We could like I say, try to focus the points on these particular councils if we think that there's a persistent issue. Sometimes the data doesn't give us all the information because, for example, with like I could say with one of the councils there, Bartistry shows 14, but that's one incident, and if it wasn't for that one incident, they wouldn't be where they are. So yeah, it's definitely something that we could do.
I think, Peter, to your point, we only heard about this guidance probably when we read this report, and maybe the monitoring officer could actually send this letter to all parish councillors, all county councillors, and then when we go to our parish council meetings, the particular councils we know there's an issue, we can perhaps provide some input through that. So it's asking the monitoring officer to
anybody who's a ward councillor, and a ward councillor role. No, that's a good point.
It's you know, we attend these parish council meetings only by invitation anyway, but maybe our sort of what the chief executive could, our soft power might enable us to Robert and then Pete.
Yeah, having thought about it, I think what Mark said needs reinforcing. It doesn't seem logical that Bartistry gets 14 when it's actually one incident. I don't know if it's worth exploring a different way of keeping the numbers, because it's frankly it's misleading.
Chair, thank you. One of the things I've found in the last 15 months since being a ward councillor now and attending my 3 parish councils and 1 town council meeting is that you're right, we're invited there, but actually what I find is that they tend to defer to you for advice and guidance on many, many matters, of which, and some of the councillors that I've sat and chatted to, there may be an issue, or what do you think to this? And you're trying to put your experience in it, because most of us are all experienced parish councillors anyway. You can put in there what you think is appropriate and not appropriate, and try and deflect the situation becoming inflamed or aggravated, or whatever, leading to an incident where we then have a case of conduct coming out. So I think it's all of our it's an opportunity for us all as ward councillors, when we sit in parish councils, to advise and help if it's welcome.
Yes, thank you, Pete. So I think if that note could go out to all the ward councillors, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I'll put that down as an action point to
yeah.
send it to the ward councillors, asking them to reiterate the points that have been raised here.
And then Robert and Mark, to your point, we're just looking perhaps the next time your report somehow reflect the fact that it's not as bad as it looks. 13 complaints is actually related to one thing, and just see what you can do with that next time.
I think some notes would help there, because at the end of the day we did receive 14 complaints. There were 14 forms filled in, 14 assessments made, 14 decision notices sent out. But I think it would help certainly to put a note that 10 of these relate to one incident, something like that.
Yeah.
When the police take reports of a crime, 14 complaints of the same crime don't end up as 14 crimes. They still end up as one crime.
Okay. Now, the other question I want to ask, really, Sean, is there's a suggestion in paragraph 39 on page 26, on page 29. This is a suggestion that the monitoring officer and the chair of this committee might wish to write to the chairs to advise for certain patterns. I don't know whether anybody on the committee has a particular view on that. Paragraph 39.
Chair, it seems actually that the resolution that you've asked about putting it through the ward members does pick up that original suggestion. Obviously, for the committee to decide.
Yes, maybe an appropriate covering note.
Yeah.
Okay. Perhaps you'll ask the managing officer to liaise with me about that. If that's not you in this case, it probably is, isn't it?
I'll pass. We'll draft something up for you for
okay.
a covering note with the document that's at Appendix 4.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Do you want to move on then to the rest of the recommendations, Sean?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be a lot briefer on this one.
Well, it's not you that are being brief, it's everybody else.
So this is Appendix 2, starting on page 35. This was a redrafting exercise rather than trying to change what was the process for code of conduct. So for investigating of code of conduct. So we've taken two documents that the council used previously, a 9-page document drafted by this, and then the guidance document, which is 47 pages, I think, from memory. And we've tried to remove the fluff in there, which talks about what you might do or what you could do, and we've tried to narrow it down to the points that we will do. This is what we will do when we have when we receive a code of conduct complaint. So we're hoping that it's clearer. We try to make it as sequential as possible. So you start at the top and you work your way through, and as you work your way through that is the process. We've included at Appendix 3 a flow chart to show you exactly what the process is from a simplistic organogram type chart. And we've added on at the end some additional guidance in relation to the circumstances that we've addressed over the last few years. For example, things like if a complainant withdraws, what happens then? That's not in the original guidance. If someone wants it to remain confidential, what happens then? If you have a complainant that says it doesn't want their name to come forward, how we deal with those type of things. So also bits about what we would do, effectively what we would do as officers, but we've written it down so members and the public are clear as to what our approach is. For example, persistent breaches, the same thing over and over again. At some point, you've got to look at the entire sequence of that behaviour, not just take it individually. Open to questions or any and again, this has been looked over by the independent person, and thanks to Councillor Woodall as well for casting an eye over it as well and helping us out. Thank you.
Mark, do you have anything you want to add on this?
Thank you, Chair. No, it was very thorough, and there were two things we were talking about, sort of sanctions and things like that. Well, one of them was to make sure that the breach, if there was a breach, that it was publicised on the web, on the council website for, I think it was 6 years. So that is a form of when people come up for re-election, there's evidence there that could work either for or against somebody, and I think there's also about the other thing that that can be recommended is training. We've talked about training already, about how to let people know about the code of conduct and what should be done. And that people who are, in breach can be offered training, or not offered training. They can be recommended to go on training, but that we also say that we follow it up by checking that they actually went on it, that it was done. So the MO gets advised when that training was completed as well. So there's a little bit of a closing of the loop. So that's a couple of changes, and thank you for including those.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else? Any other comments? Yes, Aubrey.
Yeah, just a couple of points on the procedures to be followed. On page 46, 3C, referral for formal investigation. 3CA, it refers to the monitoring officer will investigate or appoint an investigating officer to gather further information and evidence. Does this investigating officer, can that be anybody, or is there a qualification attached to that? It seems to specify that the monitoring officer can appoint anyone as an investigating officer.
Sean.
It doesn't restrict in the wording itself. It doesn't set a minimum level of qualification, that kind of thing. In practice, the monitoring officer will look at the nature of the breach and then try to determine who the appropriate level. For example, more often than not, we use internal solicitors for this type of thing, who have an understanding about evidence, procedure, confidentiality, those type of things. But again, if it was a complaint about a finance perspective or budgetary, something like that, there's a good possibility that the MO could go, well, we might need someone external who has that financial understanding, or speak to someone in our finance department to see if you have anybody there who would be appropriate, qualified and confident enough to do that role. It's that they're not easy at doing an investigation, and to try and get the best out of people and get the answers you want. So it is a bit of a skill, and not just the MO would want to be confident that the person has that ability before they would even consider what their skill set is.
Aubrey, do you want to suggest any change to the wording or anything like that to clarify that, or are you happy with that explanation?
Yeah, the other point I was wanting to raise was on page 49. The standards panel hearing procedure, 4C. At least 5 working days before the date of the meeting of the standards panel, the Democratic Services Manager shall notify the subject member, complainant, and any relevant witnesses of the date, time and place of the meeting and the membership of the standards panel. That seems very short notice. You know, if they can't make it for that meeting, are they able to rearrange it? And
in practice, this will be agreed. The reason why 5 working days was picked, because that's the minimum required under the Local Government Act 72. In practice, we're not going to want to have a standards panel without the complainant there, unless without the subject member there, unless the subject member forces the issue by never being available. The reality is that a date will be picked that suits, provided it's not an unreasonable amount of delay. So you could say the 5 days. You could change that to 10 days if you wanted to. We would need to check to see how that impacts on the days beforehand. In practice, I found previously the 5 was enough, but that's for the committee. You know, if you wish to, that is an element which isn't in our current process, and we picked that on the basis that that is the minimum. But actually, the reality of the situation is that, you know, we want a panel that has the right people there. But over to the committee on what you think on that point.
Yeah, Aubrey, do you want to suggest any changes to either of those paragraphs?
no, so long as there's a possibility of varying the 5 days and to accommodate everybody, then fine.
Chair, further down 4H, it does say that the Democratic Service Manager reasonable endeavour to arrange a date which is convenient to standards panel subject member. So it does try to get a date which the parties can make.
Okay, yeah, I think that's covered. Yeah. Right. I have actually had an email from Councillor Harvey with some questions about the wording. Given that this isn't really changing anything at the moment, it's just putting everything in slightly new wording. I'm not going to mention all the comments you've got. So Sean, if perhaps Mark and you and I can have a look at Councillor Harvey's ideas, and if we'll respond appropriately to that. But we'll adopt this for today, and then if we can make changes as we go forward.
The recommendation does. I've asked you to give me a delegation to make typographical, consequential changes. I don't know if that already would cover what's in that. but
I would hope so. Yeah, yeah.
petitions are changed as necessary. But or it's over to the panel. Sorry, it's over to the panel if you want, obviously, if you want us to amend it and consider what's there.
Yeah, well, I think we can look again in 6 months' time. In the meantime, we can cover off any issues which we might want to. And yes, if they're minor ones, then you can cover them off yourself, Sean. Yeah. Were there any other questions, Frank?
Yeah, I just wanted to look at the welfare of the person that's been complained about, just for a couple of minutes. So they receive notice that the code of conduct has arrived, and then right at the bottom of that letter, they're told that they mustn't discuss it with anyone, but they could have independent persons. I have to say that's right at the bottom of the notification that you've just received a code of conduct letter. When you open a code of conduct letter, the first thing you do is panic. I mean, knowing, because I've received one, which proved negative in the end, but on that receiving of it, I noticed that different people react in very different ways when they're subject to something code of conduct wise. Because suddenly there's something happening in your life that you're no longer in control of, and something that you weren't far from expecting. So I'm wondering how the person issuing that letter ensures that the different people that have received those letters are they okay? Is there something we could have done to put in place? I know there's an option to contact an independent person, but is that necessarily what they would choose to do? Whereas I'm thinking that there should be somebody that they can contact, almost like a friend, where they can just say, I've received this, I just need your support right now. There isn't a person there that anybody can go to, is there? And my concern is, on the back of all that's happened nationally with the two big cases that are on TV that have been featured, the post office scandal and the blood scandal, which have horrified people because so much has gone hidden because people think they're on their own and they can't do anything. I don't want anybody subject to a code of conduct letter to feel that they can't go somewhere and express how they're feeling, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, well, it does, Frank. I think it's a very good point. I mean, people who are getting these letters are mostly volunteers at the parish council level, and to get a letter like this could actually be quite concerning for them. So, you know, they're being prevented from speaking to anybody else. Sean, I don't know whether you can put your thinking hat on this one.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point, Chair. Currently, we apply the code as drafted, which does offer this third-party independent person for those type of conversations to have, but you don't know this person from Adam, so to speak, and you might not be happy to do that. I'll take that away, and we'll discuss with the officers about changing that, because I think there is a third path, which is, you know, it's not, the process is supposed to be confidential. You know, that we're trying to protect the process, trying to ensure that you know, a member gets a letter, runs off, tells everybody, goes, speaks to witnesses, that type of thing. But then I can understand the flip side of that, which is, well, this is your burden yourself. You can't speak to anybody about that. And I think it's a good point that there has to be a third way on that. And jumping out to me is that, well, there must be someone in someone's life that you can speak to that's not going to hit either of those two elements, whether or not be your husband, wife, partner, that type of thing. Who you're confident will maintain that, keep that confidentiality. Can I come back to the panel on that? And is it okay if I just I'll put the suggestion to the group, to the committee, and then certainly, like I say, I've got the delegation delegation to make these changes. And it could be something as simple as, if you wish to speak to a third party, speak to the officer who sent you the letter, explain who it is and why you want to speak to them, and it could be just as simple as that. And then that gives you that that kind of emotional or fortitude behind to kind of share the burden, but knowing that it doesn't impact the process, and also so you're protected as well, because you can't be accused of trying to impede the investigation or anything like that. So would that be all right? I think it's a good point, and I know it's not the first time it's been raised. That's a little bit I'm kicking myself slightly on. So at a different authority, I may add. So I think there is a third way, which probably isn't not much more than what we just discussed, where you can speak to someone.
Frank, how do you feel about that sort of? Thank you for raising it.
Yeah, I just think we should look at it and just ensure that everybody in this process feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
That's the issue about it.
Yeah, Robert.
Yes, I 100% support Frank. I'm glad you raised that. But if you tell your wife, for example, and she does not breach the confidence, nobody will ever know, will they? So.
Pete.
Chair, thanks. There is the element of habeas corpus, that you're innocent till proven guilty, and therefore, as Frank, as he said, you suddenly think you're doing a good job, and you suddenly open the mail one morning, there's a letter accusing you of an act. Where do you turn to? So maybe somewhere, as Frank suggested, a critical friend within the legal department that you could contact, and that should be in the letter when it comes to you. If you wish some assistance or whatever, come to this person. So you're actually directing the individual where to go to. But I think we have to remember that it could be quite a traumatic effect for an individual.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Frank. Any other equally useful comments? No. Okay. So just kind of to sum up a little bit, I think we do record our thanks to the independent persons for the work which they do. And Sean, thank you for confirmation that they've seen the report. If they wish to come along to the next meeting themselves in person, that would be equally useful, but that's for them to decide. I think we've made some progress on the guidance. No, we've got someone's raised their hand. Deborah, is it? Yeah, Deborah, you have your hand raised, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues and members. Just by way of assistance, if I may, on that last portion of the discussion around support to members who find themselves on the receiving end of a complaint, I think there is some room for us to make it overt that there is the option to contact one of the team, typically myself or our senior paralegal officer. And I certainly can say that I'm always mindful of this issue, and it does tend to be myself and Sean liaising first of all, myself taking that first step. I can think of examples where if a complaint is lengthy and complex and would in human terms be quite overwhelming to anybody, I will always phone that councillor first and say, this is coming, please don't panic, here's what the process would look like. At this stage, the monitoring officer has made no decisions, and this is what we need. And I've found that to, by way of feedback, be helpful and supportive. So I just wanted to offer the reassurance that as we are now in the process, there's some room for refinement, which I know Sean has said we'll think about, so that it's overt on that letter, but that it's something that we're absolutely mindful of right now, when we have been for some time.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. Chris, I don't know whether you wanted to raise concerns about sanctions which are available, and whether maybe going forward the government might look to put in place something with more teeth than we currently have.
Well, I understand, Mr. Chairman, our Chief Executive was invited to make representations to government, is that right? Did you not hear any of that?
No, just for the record, you may want to say it again. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I understand that our Chief Executive has made representations to government about a possibility of tweaking the Code of Conduct.
Yes, I
And,
think it's
if
the Association of Chief Executives,
there is
Solace, that
there is the chance
yes.
to see what has been put forward, we might, as a committee, throw our not inconsiderable weight behind those comments, or we might decide not to. I don't know, but perhaps we should consider doing that.
Yeah. So I think probably we add as another request that the letter that's gone from Solace to central government that is circulated to the committee, and perhaps the Sean and myself can work on a draft to send ourselves to the relevant ministers.
The report has been issued by Solace, and it's quite a lengthy report and covers everything, not just standards. But I can forward that around to everybody, and it's quite what Solace has put forward is basically a plea to fix it. They haven't really said that much about how or what, or offered that much there. So if the committee did want to delegate you to make that request to ministers, it's, that could be with possible suggestions for that. Then, because I think what we've discussed, that it would be pretty simple for government to make small changes that will make a big impact.
Yeah.
We're not asking for to recreate the pre-2011 regime. I think that was shown that it had its downsides, but where we are now, we could get to a considerable better place with some small sanctions, as suggested by the councillor.
Fine, thank you very much. So we can add that to the recommendations. Have I missed anything? Anybody? No? Okay, so the recommendations here. So first of all, we note the Code of Conduct complaints arrangements and guidance. We approve the updated Code of Conduct arrangements subject to the Head of Legal Services making any appropriate changes. And the other two recommendations about Solace and seeing a copy of that, and the monitoring officer sending a copy of the letter dealing with respect to all ward councillors. Are we all content with those recommendations? Show of hands, please. Thank you. Moving on then to item 8. This is an update on the progress with the audit, and I'll hand over, if I may, to Judith, the Chief Accountant, to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report updates the committee on the progress of the external audit of the draft financial statements for the year end the 31st of March 2024. As reported to the June committee, the draft financial statements were published in line with the statutory deadline of the 31st of May. The external audit plan indicated that the audit would start on the 24th of June. However, early resource became available within Grant Thornton, and the council finance team were able to facilitate an early start on the audit. So we've gained approximately 3 weeks on that. The audit is progressing in line with the audit plan. To date, no material errors have been found by the auditors in the draft financial statements. Grant Thornton have committed to completing the external audit to enable them to present the audit findings report and opinion to this committee in September. And this will enable the council to publish the audited financial statements by the statutory deadline of the 30th of September. Appendix A to this report has been prepared by Grant Thornton, and Grace Hawkins is online to present this.
Grace, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Judith, for that introduction as well. So yeah, I'll take the report as read, and as Judith has said, the audit is progressing well, and we have had a bit of a head start, so we hope to finish earlier than expected. One key thing that I just wanted to flag with members today is a change since the audit plan, which has been caused by the increase in spend for the council. So there's a threshold of 500 million that is applied on our audit side, and anything over that is counted as a major local audit. Herefordshire has tipped over that this year for the first time, so there have been some changes that have needed to be made as a result of that. The key one, which will impact on the audit and the audit findings report, which you will see at the next committee, is a decrease in our materiality level that's applied. With a major local audit, this is capped at 1.5% of the gross expenditure, which is lower than what we initially reported to you in our plan. So this has meant that a couple of our areas of focus and samples have had to be increased. So I just wanted to bring that to the committee's view before the September committee when this is reported in our audit findings report. There are other things that we put in place internally as well to ensure that we deliver a quality audit. So there's a review partner which will review the work after myself, and we're also doing a financial reporting review of the accounts as well, just to support that process. So that was the only thing I was going to bring to the attention of the committee today, but happy to take any questions on that or the progress of the audit to date.
Well, Grace, thank you for that and for a very positive report. We're working ahead of time, which is a fantastic position to be in. Maybe we will be the first council in the country to complete our accounts. Who knows?
No pressure.
No. So, any questions from anybody? I think we just acknowledge with thanks the progress. Aubrey.
Yes. Regarding the increase in the audit fee, I wonder if you can explain how many hours and people will be involved in the audit this time. At £354,839, if the charge out rate was £200 an hour, that would take 1,784 hours of time to achieve that, which is equivalent, say, a 30-hour week to 60 weeks, which is how does that compare with your actual charge out rates and the hours you believe will be necessary to complete the audit?
Grace.
That's a good question. Yes, it's not directly linked to hours and resource. So the scale fee is dictated by PSAA, of which you're co-opted into that arrangement. There's been an increase from the prior year because of the new contract that's come into place. This is the first year of the new contract where rates have increased. So this reflects the change in kind of the audit sector. Obviously, it's been discussed in terms of catching up on delays, the focus of the FRC on quality and kind of the inputs that we need into the audit as well. So all of that's been taken into account. And they then set the fees based on kind of the level and the risk of each audit as well. So that's why you would have seen an increase year on year. There are standard costs that underpin that. Obviously, that is commercially sensitive, and that is probably something that needs to go through PSAA in terms of the mechanisms of setting the scale fee. But that is set by PSAA and not ourselves as Grant Thornton.
Yeah. Okay. Can you say how many hours and how many staff are being devoted to the audit?
Yes, we do have a budget that underpins the work and a work plan that divides it up based on the skills and experience of the team. So currently we do have 6 members of staff working on the audit, so we've got quite a large team working. In terms of the detail behind that, I would have to go away and come back to you and see what we can share.
I think it's certainly true, Aubrey, that the increase is huge. We've discussed that before. It's we're in a very difficult position to negotiate because there really isn't any practical alternative, it must be a common complaint across all councils when there's pressure on costs for ourselves anyway, that professional services fees are going up at the same time. It's just an additional problem for local authorities at the moment. Any other comments, Peter?
Thank you, Chair. As they say, there's no real competition for these jobs.
Mine's a very simple question. Could you explain ISA 315? It's something I'm not aware of.
Yes, of course. Yes, so this is an updated standard which came in for the 22-23 financial year, so last year. This has more of a focus on our understanding of the processes used and the controls in place by the council. So as part of our planning work, we get an understanding of all of the business processes for the key balances and the IT systems that feed into those as well. And we walk through some of those controls to make sure that we understand them and focus where the risks are. The requirements under ISA 315 changed last year, which increased the work that was required for that. So there's a lot more focus on IT systems, understanding the controls and business processes within those and how it feeds into the key numbers in the accounts. So when PSAA set their scale fee, that hadn't come into place yet. So that's why that is outlined as an additional fee line in the report.
Great, thank you.
Grace, are you going to go into any detail of the sector update? Were you planning to do that?
No, there's more for information, but obviously happy to take any questions or any discussions as well on that.
Well, I was quite interested on page 14 of that report. Just see what page number it is in the pack. Thank you, Mark. 82. So this is all about preventing failure in local government. Important issue for us as a committee. And halfway through it says opportunities for the audit committee to make a difference around. And then there are 5 bullet points. The first is focuses on risk management alone. Well, reality is that we cover more than that. We do have different roles. The second one is independence, having an independent chair or at least one independent member. Well, we are making progress on that. Specialist training and support for members of the committee. Just reflecting on this myself, I was thinking we perhaps could have done more in the last year about training, but we do have a session from Rupert after this session, which is good. Direction over internal audit. I feel fairly confident that we have a regular dialogue with our internal audit partners. And then finally, curiosity and asking the right questions. We've got room to go, I'm sure, on all of these points, but I just wonder whether you had a particular reflection yourself as you've been doing our audit, whether there are things which you feel we might be doing a little better.
Yeah, I don't have any concerns, I think, from attending these meetings and obviously reviewing the minutes prior to me taking over as well. I think, you're curious and you challenge us as auditors as we would expect and hope for as well. And obviously being risk focused, I think, is the key thing, and being on top of those key risks that not only are in the risk registers, but as it says, the internal audit and others can investigate, and making sure you're not just covering the same ground each year, but focusing on the risk areas. So I've seen that from the discussions that I've witnessed so far as part of this committee.
Yes, I'm quite keen that we look carefully at risk, but spend more attention. Rachel, you were going to comment.
And just to note that as part of the work that Grant Thornton will carry out in respect to the value for money opinion later in the autumn, one of the key areas that they look at is those charged with governance and the governance arrangements, and that includes the effectiveness of the role of Audit and Governance Committee. And I don't think we received any recommendations in the last couple of years other than the one that we know we are managing in terms of that independent member.
Okay, thank you. And the other points I just wanted to comment on, there's a new workbook to support councillors in their work on community leadership. That's on page 85. I wasn't aware of this. I just thought it might be quite a useful thing potentially for councillors to have a look at. I'm going to have a quick read of it. Sean, any thoughts from a sort of training perspective for councillors through corporate services? You weren't aware of it either, so that's fine.
I've seen it, but it's some months ago.
Yeah.
So, off the top of my head, no.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we might, if anybody has a moment or two, and they want to have a quick look at that and see what we might learn from that. Mark.
Thank you. One of my questions, Grace, is you mentioned that part of the auditing process was understanding the systems, the IT systems, the finance systems. Have you found, have there been any significant changes in Herefordshire Council that means that you have to adapt and learn whole new systems this year?
No, nothing this year. But we do get a refreshed understanding even if there haven't been any changes each year, so we don't automatically roll forward from the prior year. We get a fresh understanding each year during our planning visit.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Aubrey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I note that you mentioned the housing benefits subsidy certification that you started work on 2020-21 is in progress. Is it your intention to bring us up to date to 23-24 within this audit? And why has it been neglected?
So there were some issues that we have gone back and forth on the 2020-21, and I inherited that from Pete Barber as well at the beginning of the year when he handed over to me. So I've got up to speed on that one, and I have a meeting with our specialist grants team tomorrow just to check on progress, and we hope to conclude on that by September. Once that's concluded, we'll then be able to kickstart the years following that, and hopefully, because we've got that updated understanding for the year where we had issues, hopefully they won't take as long then, and we will plan to catch up. I don't want to commit to say that we'll catch up this calendar year, given that there are a number of years outstanding, but it is resourced to be completed as soon as the 2021 is signed.
Good. Well, Grace, thank you very much. We look forward to the next meeting. We're trying to potentially rearrange the meeting date. I don't know whether you knew that. Do you know your availability for the suggested dates?
I do. I need to come back to Jennifer on that.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, please do. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. So the recommendation it really is to note progress on the external audit for the year ended 31st of March 2024, which we have done. So show of hands to accept that. Thank you very much. Item 9, this is the internal audit report for quarter 1 2024-25, and it's probably over to you, Rupert. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, our quarter 1 progress report. So this summarises internal audit progress, any outcomes or changes since we last reported to committee on the 11th of June. The substance and key messages of our report largely start on page 94 of the agenda pack, so I'll start on that page. On that page, we've hopefully captured sort of the key messages from the reporting period. So just to quickly run through those, our indicative rolling audit opinion continues to be reasonable. So that's based on the audits and findings that are coming out of our work on a sort of rolling basis. There are no high organisational risks that we categorise that we believe need to be brought to the attention of this committee from our internal audit work since last reporting. We've completed 6 audit reviews since the last committee, and details of those have been included further down, and that's on page 101 of the agenda report pack. We're in a relatively good place in terms of tracking and monitoring of internal audit actions, and this is following that responsibility being passed over to SWAP at the beginning of this financial year. I'll cover that in a bit more detail shortly. Customer satisfaction, pleasing to see that continues to increase, and actually really pleasing that in a lot of recent audits we've had feedback that's exceeded expectations in aspects of the audit process, and that includes audits where it hasn't necessarily been a positive audit opinion, so it's good to see that sort of balance even in those audits. Finally, no sort of limited or no assurance audits issued since the last committee in June. So we haven't brought any sort of audit reports in full to this committee. However, just a reminder to committee members that through Audit Board and your access to that, you can access details of the full audit report for any audits. So even if they're advisory or reasonable, we don't bring everything just on a risk-based sort of approach. Otherwise, you'd likely have pages and pages of audit reports without sort of significant risks or areas of attention. So we tend to just bring the limited and no assurance reports. But by all means, if you did want to dig into the details, they are there and available in the background. Moving down our report, so looking at page 95 of the agenda pack, I think we covered this last time, but just as a reminder, due to the refresh of the authority's corporate risk register in March, there's still quite a large number of strategic risks against which there is currently no audit coverage. So I believe that was sort of touched upon in Grace's report and the sector report. So just obviously ensuring that internal audits aligned to the strategic risks, and the committee has good sort of visibility, direction and sort of input into that process. We do expect this to better populate and expand coverage as the year goes on. So it's obviously a key focus of ours when we sit down with directors and plan audits and suggest audits, that we're looking to tick off key strategic risks, as well as our own intel and knowledge in terms of emerging risk areas at Herefordshire. So like I say, we expect that table to kind of better populate and expand as the year goes on, but certainly one for committee to keep a close eye on. So returning to the tracking of internal audit actions, this is picked up on page 98 of the paper. As highlighted there previously, just as a reminder, this was covered by the Council's corporate performance team that followed these up. I believe they brought a report to this committee on a 6-monthly basis. I think the last one of those was in July last year. You may have had one in December, but there's obviously a list of outstanding internal audit actions. Following discussions with the service, and actually expedited by the fact that the previous officer who did a lot of the work around this has now left the authority, it was agreed that from April 2024, SWAP would pick up the responsibility of sort of coordinating, tracking and monitoring the actions. Just to make clear, our responsibility doesn't expand into actually doing the actions. That very clearly sits still with management, but certainly the responsibility for tracking them, for collating them and reporting through to this committee. I think there's probably a few key reasons why we thought this made sense. One, under our professional standards, we are required to have a system of audit follow-up from our work. So whilst the corporate performance team was carrying out the process currently, we still did do our sort of risk-based approach to follow-up. But hopefully this now all brings it under one sort of umbrella and one place. Secondly, as we're obviously raising and agreeing all the actions with management from internal audit, we have these stored in our audit management system anyway, so hopefully we've got a really good grasp of data quality now, and know exactly when and where these actions have been raised. And then thirdly, again, Audit Board hopefully provides some really nice functionality around this, and we have actually expanded access to a dashboard to members, which again will provide the details of every single outstanding audit action. But you can also sort of cut and visualize it quite nicely in terms of the highest priority ones or the longest outstanding ones, or outstanding actions by directorate, for example. So hopefully a number of different ways you can look at it rather than just having one long list of actions that you have to sort of work hard maybe to see the wood from the trees. So page 98, we've just taken some screenshots from this dashboard to highlight the current overall picture. So we've been through a process of sort of cleansing that data, making sure we know exactly what the action is, who's responsible, what the timescale was. I will caveat that at the moment, obviously, there's probably a large number of historical actions. So although we have done that initial cleanse, what we're doing now is going back to each and every manager to get an up-to-date picture. And we do expect that will result in quite a few managers coming back saying they've done the action, we can close this off now. So we're really hopeful by the time we come back in October that initial picture will have fallen, and we're going to be really sort of hot and on top of this going forwards. So hopefully we'll see a decline initially, and then we're in a really good place to sort of monitor and track this. And like you've mentioned, we've got a session on internal audit training following this committee, so more than happy to kind of briefly run through that dashboard, or again, me and Amy can do a brief sort of video that talks through that dashboard. But like I say, you can see all the outstanding ones, you can see any closed ones, you can filter it by priority. So hopefully you can sort of pick and choose in terms of your level of sort of interest in this area. Other than that, I think page 100 sort of gives some sort of current details in terms of what we're currently working on. Again, completely taken from the live rolling plan that you have access to, and we keep up to date on a daily basis, as well as those audits that we anticipate to start on next. Happy to expand on any of those aspects or open it up to questions there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rupert. Robert.
Yes, do we have any indication, the areas on page 95 where the list of coverage, which you've already noted because there's an increase in the numbers on the risk register, do we have any indication of when there might be some coverage on those items listed? Because a number of them are quite important imminently. For example, the subject of mosaic was raised the other day in another scrutiny committee meeting, so the expansion of that is important. Project management, we've got a number of big projects that we're embarking upon that need good management with the help of software. So we'd like to know relatively soon whether there's an issue. Not so much what the answer is, but when you look at it, is there an issue with any of those areas? And at the moment, we haven't got a clue, not from the internal audit point of view. So I wonder if you know any timetable for looking at those issues, and is there any priority on the listing of them?
Yes, thank you. A really good question. I probably won't be able to commit to a definite timescale for all of them, but like I say, it's sort of front and centre of our planning discussions. So for every discussion we have for the respective director that looks after Mosaic or project management, for example, that's front and centre of we haven't done any work on this. Obviously, as you've rightly pointed out, this is an internal audit view, so there will be other sources of assurance, for example, on project management. I'm sure that either a sort of first line management function will have carried out some review or assurance. So this is just an internal audit view, but like I say, very much front and centre of our minds for planning discussions. These need to be the top of the list, and sort of good reasons that if they say no, we've got that covered, then what we will try and do is make a record of that, so that we can say, for example, Mosaic, internal audit are not covering it, but Ofsted, for example, have looked at it recently, or internally the services have carried out a review, so that you've got that assurance as committee members.
Could I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that there's a recommendation in that we need to know an approximate timeline for when each of these things will be looked at, and whether there's the organisation, the council, has an input into the order in which they're looked at, because some of them might appear to us to be more urgent than others.
I suppose what's kind of going through my head is that a responsibility of the cabinet or the chief executive through him? Who drives this, Peter?
It probably falls to me because in addition to finance, I'm also corporate services, and that includes ICT. So I know that's one of the reasons that we're looking to. We've got a program in place for £1.3 million to replace a Civica planning software, which will obviously make a significant impact on the planning service. And we're also looking at other aspects of ICT, along with, for example, we've rolled out MS365 and so on and so forth to improve the automation.
I think you're thinking more top line, aren't you, Robert? Sort of the main risks which we're faced, and when are they going to be?
I suspect that I sincerely hope that all these areas are actually in hand. It's just that when the internal auditors look at it, they should hopefully very quickly be able to say, well, actually, this hasn't been addressed at all, and that would be a crisis. On the other hand, they might be able to say that it's in hand, it's the relevant cabinet officer or the relevant officers of the council are dealing with it, and this is the progress they've made. So we'd have an idea from an audit point of view, not from much from supervising, Peter Stoddart on how he's doing his job, but on whether these things are actually being looked at to see if there is a risk, which is what the whole thing's about. And so to prioritise those looks to make sure that they're in the right order and that we know approximately when they're going to be looked at would be very helpful, I think.
Mark, were you going to?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. But following on a bit from that, it's like we have a work program that gives us an annual view, a rolling 12 months, isn't it? Yeah. So a rolling 12 months view. I suppose, is that the sort of thing that you're thinking of?
Yes, internal audit and from our governance hat, we want to make sure that these things, which are, many of them are very important, are actually in hand. And it's internal audit that will highlight that, well, wait a minute, maybe they're not, and there's a bit of a risk there that it, you know, and so that would be something that we would be able to look at and say, well, it's going to be looked at in November, this particular issue, that's soon enough, and we'll know then if there's likely to be a problem because they'll tell us. That's the sort of thing that I had in mind.
Rupert, can you direct us to what we have at the moment to show? I think we do have a 12-month plan, don't we, of some sort, and but a flexible one, so that as other things come along, we can change it.
We do, absolutely, and I guess thinking on my feet, what we could do, and I think would address the point, which I think is a very valid one, is perhaps show in that rolling plan, because we certainly will have sort of placeholders that are planned against some of these risks, but we don't sort of show that as coverage yet because they're obviously placeholders and they haven't taken place yet. But what we could do is create another category that effectively says it's on the radar and we're planning to look at it, so that you as committee members have some assurance that we are planning to look at it, or it's in train. Not to say that it definitely will happen, but rather than just a sea of red, that there's gaps that you sort of say, right, we've got a review of project management and that's in, you know, planned for 3 months' time, or we've got a review of Mosaic, that's in 6 months' time. That might help. My second suggestion, thinking on my feet, is obviously I think you've got the corporate risk registers coming in the September committee. Typically with the risk management process, you would have obviously the name of the risk, but you'd also have the likelihood impact, but also mitigating controls. So for strategic risk, you know, contract fleet lease expiry, you'd have mitigating controls of, we've got a contract in place, we have regular contract meetings, we have a board that scrutinises that. Again, hopefully then as committee members, you can look at that and go, yeah, I'm really reasonably comfortable with that assurance, or not quite sure about that. Can we have further internal audit, sort of independent eyes on that? That's another suggestion. Because,
for example, the secondary school places, they need to be filled in September. We're now in July. And I doubt it, I mean, I'm quite happy with our professionalism of our staff, but if there is a problem, we would need to know about that extremely urgently. And so the internal audit who look at these things might say, well, wait a minute, there is an issue in that in some regard, and that was something that would need very urgent action. So that's why prioritising and listing what's coming might be valuable.
Pete?
I think we you know, have engaged a couple of times about risk and our profile and how we do that. I think we're meeting with head of performance next month, I think, isn't it? August we're trying to do that before the September meeting.
Okay, I wasn't aware it was in my diary, but that's helpful. Yeah, yep. Yeah. Then, so Rachel, when we look at the risk register in September, so the risks will be listed. Do we have a column which says, you know, internal audit will be looking at this area at a particular time?
I don't think we have that mechanism currently, but we can look to add value to that report in September by providing assurance over the coverage. But I think it's probably fair to say, and Rupert, correct me if I'm wrong, that where an item features on the strategic corporate risk register, that doesn't automatically mean that it will be included in the audit coverage, because that risk register will present the mitigations and the risk impact, etc. So it might be that we carry something on that risk register quite naturally that we're managing through risk management arrangements. It would only require internal audit if, under your review as part of the rolling programme, it was deemed something that needed that extra focus and that internal audit review. So I don't think you're going to see 100% coverage of those strategic risks. That's not the way that the risk-based internal audit rolling programme works. But we can provide some assurance over that coverage, and that will enable you to challenge areas that don't receive that internal audit focus. If that would be helpful.
Yeah. I think that would be helpful. Robert, that.
Yes, I mean, just to give an example, if Pete makes some decision in cabinet that the cabinet agrees, that might influence one or two of these areas, and it might mean that it would be more important to look at those areas ahead of other ones, because that's suddenly more imminent, and that if anything were to go wrong and we're delayed in discovering that there was a problem, then we might make the problem worse. So it's simply just a matter of being able to prioritise based on, you know, and be a bit more light on our feet, a bit quicker on our feet when it comes to, because you won't do all of them, but which ones you do and when, it would be good if we had some influence over that and feedback about roughly when it's going to happen. That was all of my point.
Yeah, I think we have meetings in the diary with you, Rachel, and Amy and me, perhaps looking at risks. I think a few changes of personnel because Rupert's staying with the organisation, but you're handing over some of the responsibility to Amy. So Rupert, thank you for your last contribution to this, and of course there are changes within the Section 151 officer bit. So I think we need a continual dialogue to talk about risk with Pete as well. Okay, we'll keep remembering that, I think, Robert. So Mark, Frank. Oh yes, Frank wanted to. Yes, Frank.
Well, I'm on the same page really, and I was just assuming that the strategic risk, that just looks like a snapshot of a much longer list. Am I correct? And my concern was that, so that's been put into a document that we're taking a look at, and therefore we almost become responsible in some way for it, because if we didn't ask you questions about it, and like with Robert, there are things on there, and I might choose a different three altogether, to which I would be seeing as very important. And I was just wondering if there was that opportunity, but I think Rachel said it probably is, where we can see when one of those things is going to be dealt with, so that at least we know that it is in action. And then my only other question is, I don't understand the term non-opinion audits. If somebody could just explain that.
Thank you. Yes. So picking up those 2 points separately, I think I'll take that as an action, as you both raised that point, that it would be helpful to add another category to say, even if we haven't done the work yet, but we're planning to do some work, we will layer that into that visual, so that you as committee can then see that we've done some work in these areas, we're planning some work in these areas. These are the areas where we haven't done any, we haven't planned any, but there may be other assurances, but I still think it's a good conversation, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with this. Admittedly, it's quite raw, because it's an internal audit view only. It's not a holistic sort of source of assurance, which is the utopia for any local authority, and especially governance committee, that they have a holistic source of internal audit, external audit, internal sources, scrutiny. We're not quite there yet with the maturity of risk management, but it sounds like we're making progress on that. So I think that will certainly be helpful in that side, and I think that will drive conversations that, as a committee, you are worried about the biggest risks to the authority, not just the other way around in terms of the work that we bring to you. It's the flip side in terms of what we're not covering is sometimes equally as important. And on your second, more specific point around non-opinion audits, basically, well, two or more types of audits. Some of those are assurance audits, so we'll carry out a piece of work, and at the end of that work, we'll provide an assurance opinion. So at the moment, we have 4 categories, so we can either give it substantial assurance, reasonable assurance, limited assurance, or no assurance. Fortunately, we very rarely issue those, certainly not at Herefordshire. So they're assurance audits. However, on the flip side, we'll also do some advisory work. So we may sit on a board or a project. At the end of that piece of work, we won't issue an assurance opinion. We won't say that was a reasonably good board, but actually we'll provide input and insight sort of upfront, rather than sort of necessarily coming and retrospectively sort of carrying out a review and providing an assurance opinion. So it's just reflecting that we have done some work in those areas, but we haven't provided a sort of an assurance opinion in those audits.
Yeah, Mark.
Thank you. Rupert, one of the things I realised from this, you mentioned the word action, and it seems that there's 2 sides to the whole auditing. One is to identify issues and in a systematic way, but the other one is to implement some sort of action, and that's not you. That's the council's job, but you're tracking that now. So we have this new thing, action tracking, and that's probably the most valuable thing, really. Is it being done? Are mitigations being done? Is there been an initiative put in place to cope with that? So on this action tracking, I can see you've got page 98 and 99. So on 98, you've got that nice chart, open actions by priority. So we can see there's one urgent that needs to be done, 52 which are sort of classed as second priority, but there's a lot of work there. I mean, there's massive amount of actions. So those actions, these are the initiatives that the council is recommended, is that right? They're recommended to enact in order to fulfill your recommendations or to fill their own recommendation. It might be the officers themselves have said, yeah, we've got to fix this. So it won't just be swaps, it will be their own admission, as it were, that this needs to be done. So that's great. Page 99 then, could we have, if this is going to be, I don't know if it's you, and thank you so much for these reports, but if it's going to be someone else, but that page 99, that's quite sort of emotive, let's say. But it might be that HC Corporate Services has got such a big pile of stuff because they haven't had all the focus that children and young people have had. So children and young people have probably had a heck of a lot more emphasis put onto their actions, or maybe more priority, higher priority ones. So they've got fewer left open. So could we have a chart next to this which was either completed, or maybe you can never complete an action, I don't know, but what would be the next stage? If it's not open, they'd be closed, but I don't suppose these ever close. Some of these initiatives are forever, aren't they? They have to be maintained. But do you have a chart that would show closed in the period so that we can compare and we can see the reason that corporate services are so high is because very few have been completed because the emphasis has been else on other departments?
Yes, absolutely is the answer to that. And yes, they can be closed, and ideally we'd like all actions to be closed. Hopefully, you know, we try and make our actions smart, so they're not sort of aspirational sort of actions, that they are, you know, there's evidence, we found something. We call them agreed actions because it's a joint, you know, between internal audit and management. We don't get to a point where we're recommending something but management disagree it, or if, you know, in the rare occasion we do, we bring that to you, but that very rarely happens. So these are all agreed actions that should have a completion date and should be achievable. But you're absolutely right, they will be closed. I think, for example, corporate services, probably the only reason why they've got a higher number is because audit activity tends to gravitate towards corporate services. So financial audits, ICT, procurement, those sort of typical sort of audit areas. So I think that's very typical in other authorities for corporate services to have the largest amount. But absolutely, what we will do next time is provide that sort of that trend data that hopefully you're looking for, that this is the current position, but this is where it's gone since July. So corporate services have closed off 20, you know, in economy and environment have closed off 6, for example, and hopefully over time that will give you a much better idea of where those sticking points are. So as a committee, you can sort of say, we're really concerned about X directorate. Can we have the director come in and give an update, for example? If hopefully we'll never get to that point, but if, you know, I think the tracking that we'll do now will keep a much closer sort of look at this. I hope so. Yeah, we'll bring that back in October. I think we're due to bring that back, but yeah, certainly we'll provide the closed picture as well.
Thank you, Rupert. Rachel.
And I think it's just worth noting that at the start of this item, we referred to that changing process of the tracking. And so this is a complete set. So whilst it appears that many actions are outstanding and those are the older items, I think, in fact, when we add more resource and we refine the tracking, I think it's the tracking that's a little out of date rather than the delivery of the activity. And when those audits are concluded, as Rupert referred to, we agree the actions to be delivered to address the recommendations. We agree the responsible officer and the timeline, and those are managed internally as well. So internal audit swap are now responsible for collating that and tracking it and presenting it back to this committee, but that doesn't mean that the activity isn't regularly underway with a mind to addressing and closing off some of those recommendations. And naturally, over the course of the resulting activities that takes place once an audit has been given an opinion, it might be that we change as the organisation develops how we address that recommendation from the previously agreed action. So there's a natural process as well, but we are very much focused on completing those actions, and we'll be able to evidence that, I think, in that next report.
Thank you. I think we've probably dealt with that. So, Rupert, you're staying with SWAP, aren't you, Rupert? But we've had the benefit of your input for the last few months. Thank you very much. And Amy is going to continue, which is great. So thank you for that. So recommendations here. Review the areas of activity which we've done. We're satisfied necessary improvements are outlined and delivered. We note that the report considers the assurances provided and the recommendations which the report makes, and we've commented on those. So I think we've given a fairly good thrashing for this, and suggested a few improvements for the future. I think it'll be interesting looking at risks going forward, Rachel, as we do something slightly different. Maybe we'll see what comes out in September. All those happy with that recommendation can show in hands. Thank you very much. The next item is item 10, update on recruitment for independent person. Jen, do you want to say anything about this, or do you want me to say?
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm happy to. So we went out to advertise for an independent person for the Audit and Governance Committee back in May for about 6 weeks. Unfortunately, that process did not return any successful applications. I am happy to say that after a re-advertising of the position, which will close on the 1st of September, we have had at least one strong application. I think we're confident that we may be in a position to offer an interview and potentially recruit. So,
yeah.
Progress.
Good. Well,
progress.
A week ago, I don't think we had any, so we got one applicant, which is good, and we'll move on. Even if we just got one, we will still go through an interview process to check their suitability. So, any questions on that? It'd be great to have someone in place. Item 11 is the work programme. Again, that's appeared. We have that. There's a change then to the meeting date for the next meeting. We have something definite with the auditors being available.
The Grant Thornton have just confirmed they can do the 18th of September. So as long as that's okay with the rest of the committee members, I feel that we can proceed with that date.
Yeah. And if we get the account signed off, what happens? Let me see a note here. Corporate registers have been delayed with the to a meeting in September, so that's all fixed together. And Pete and I were meeting up and talking about risk. The annual review of the Council's use of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 has been added to the work programme for October. And the annual review of information access and governance has been brought forward to our meeting in September. So there'll be quite a bit on the agenda for September and also for October. But that's good. So I think I will call this meeting to an end. So thank you very much